YCS Lille has come and gone, and I'm sad to say that Lunalight didn't make the top 8 cut. Yes, it's true that the deck secured 2 spots in the top 64 at an event that had more than 2,200 players. However, with the new time rules, we know that this is no longer enough to make playoffs. So today, I'm going to be talking about some of the factors that held the deck back, as well as what you can do to better prepare for YCS Anaheim this weekend. Throughout the background of this video, you'll see some footage of me playing the deck, so if you don't feel like listening to me out, you can focus on the replays instead. So without further ado, let's get into it. So firstly, I want to talk about the indirect effect that the time changes had on the deck. So a lot of you may know this, but the new time rules mean that Top Cut is no longer limited, is now limited to 8 players instead of 32 and 64 as it was in the past. This means that players have to play more rounds of Swiss to make up for this. At this specific event, it meant that players had to play a total of 15 rounds before being considered for a spot in the top 8. This was limited to players who had an X2 record or better, with only one player bobbling in at X3. So what did this exactly mean for Lunalight? Well, you may have guessed it, but this system rewards decks that prioritize consistency over power. This is a big reason why so many players chose to pilot Yummy at the event. Now, after having played about 200 games of Lunalight, I can tell you that the deck is consistent, boasting 11 plus starters, but it can brick on its non-engine and some hands which will just fall to a single hand trap. And when you're playing 15 plus rounds, this is more likely to happen, which makes it likely that you will drop a round just because of bad luck. So what can you do to correct this? Well, a lot of players have noticed this and instead decided to reduce their non-engine count from 15 to 12, and in some cases people are only playing 10, to ensure that hands are more consistent and resistant to disruption. Playing a less non-engine might feel like a yikes, but you'd be surprised at just how much push this deck has. And when you consider that Liger is basically the best board break in the game, all you need to do is find a way to secure a Liger, and that's generally enough for you to close out the game going second. Another reason comes from players respecting the deck. Lunalight kinda went under the radar for the longest time, but after its second place finish at Worlds, people started to recognize just how powerful the deck actually is. Liger is without question the best tower ever printed, and it gives the deck the ability to play going first or second, which is something that separates it from every other tower strategy to date. Also, the deck received 0 hits from the recent ban list, which meant that players anticipated it to be one of the top 3 decks in the room. Because of this, players recognized that they need to allocate dedicated Lunalight outs in their side deck, which can be noted in the increase in cards like Lava Golem, Woshi, Kaijus, and of course Retaliating Sea, which just ends your turn if you haven't drawn a breaker. So how do you counter this? Well, there isn't anything too reliable. Lunalight's shortcoming is that it's a deck with a little recovery. So Lava Golem that tributes both of your Ligers, or a Liger plus Baguska, is normally lights out. A way around this is by playing cards like Rivalry of Warlords and Goes and Match in the side, but these are hard one-offs that you have to draw. Overall, you should win more games than you lose, but sometimes your opponent gets lucky twice and that just ends your tournament run. I'm sure you've guessed it by now. But my third reason is Droll and Lockbird. I don't need to say too much about this. Droll didn't exactly see too much play at Worlds because, well, Mitsurugi wasn't a deck there. But in the TCG, it is, which means that Lunalight is out here catching strays. Now the deck has lines they can play through Droll, but Droll still severely lowers the ceiling of your end board. Without Droll, you can end on 2 Ligers, a Baguska plus SP, or most commonly you'll end on 2 Ligers plus an IP, or SP, Baguska plus Liger. So yeah, Droll does lower your ceiling quite a bit. Moving into Anaheim, people will need to know how to sequence their plays to lower the impact of Droll. If you've been paying attention to what's been going on in the background, you'll know exactly how to do so. Finally, I think that players solving the board breaker versus hand trap debate is putting Lunalight at a disadvantage to this format. At the start of the current season, many players started running board breakers over hand traps for 2 reasons. They out Yummy's end board, and they don't play into Izuna or any of our hard counters like Talons or Thrust. Statistically, this made a lot of sense since K9 and Yami promised to be the most represented decks of the format, and they were for some time. However, as the formats progressed, we happen to now find ourselves in a situation where a lot of decks can deal with breakers. Lunalight is an obvious example, but Draco's Tail can negate one with Flame, Fusion from hand, and summon Arthur from grave. Mitsurugi has Purification, Murakumo, and Prayers. Even Apophis has several ways of dealing with Warwick breakers. This argues that hand traps are actually better than breakers this format, especially when considering that all of the above decks have innate ways of breaking fields. Think Murakumo, Liger, and the Draco's Tail fusion materials. Unfortunately, while Lunalight has a lot of push, it doesn't exactly trade well with low impact hand traps like Veiler, Imperm, Impulse, and Ogre. If any of these four are timed correctly, it can be devastating and sometimes end your turn there and then. The situation, of course, is to play more engine and rely on Liger plus one breaker to deal with board, when going second, of course. But until Lunalight players start making this change, they'll continue to fall victim to high hand trap decks, which more and more players seem to be playing. Now I'm gonna head on out, but you can keep looking at the replays.